Hello, and we're live. There we go. Looking at the camera's pointing down at us a wee bit tonight. Let me see if we can just tilt that up a wee bit. And I hope you can all hear me for anybody who's listening out there. It's Friday night, Saturday night. Not here yet. But it's Friday night here in Northern Ireland. It's very stormy, very cold, very windy, and very wet indeed. So, welcome to the science fiction station, or the doghouse as I like to call it. And as usual, if you have any questions on tonight's topic, I'd love to hear them, or any comments about Dune. There's Joseph saying first. Hi, Joseph. How are you? I hope you can hear me okay. So welcome to the show, whatever that is. And I just thought I'd have a wee chat tonight about bringing up the topic. I'd read an article about Dune and wanted to have a wee chat about it, hopefully with some Dune fans tonight, and see what you thought about it. The gist of the article, it was over on, it was an opinion piece in the Arts and Life section of the Financial Times USA by a chap called Janan Ganesh. Excuse me. And the article is about, as an opinion piece, as I said, about stop intellectualizing pop culture, suggesting that this response to Dune shows an overeducated society reading profundity into mere entertainment, etc. So I was wondering about if anybody had read this article and what your thoughts about it were. I wasn't too amused by it, but it is an opinion piece, as I said, and I thought I would sort of maybe frame tonight's discussion around it. Sound is fine, says Joseph. I'm well indeed. Hope you and yours are well. Thank you very much, Joseph. We're all not too bad here. It's batten down the hatches day today. It's been horrific all day. And it's still very, very nasty outside, just absolutely miserable. So, seeing the headline only, says Joseph. I'll give you a bit of a gist of it, I suppose. As I said, it is an opinion piece, though it's from the Financial Times. And as much as it sort of says all the films, etc., is very good, what the author is suggesting is that what he calls, I'll quote you here, is the problem is not the film. The problem is its investiture by critics and audiences with more meaning than it can bear. If it were unique in this regard, we could put it down to the giddiness of a world allowed back to the cinema. Excuse me. But it's about the intellectual aggrandizement of pop culture. And it's interesting the way the person writes it. He describes himself as being middle brow, whatever that is. And I suppose it's a discussion about woke culture, and he describes it as the quotes about the rage of a generation of underemployed humanities graduates, for example. I suppose the interesting thing, the gist of it really, is that he finds it, I don't know whether he finds it amusing or not, but he's suggesting that the point of an ever smarter society talks about how people are educated once upon a time, and of a particular sort of class of people in the 90s where, X amount going to get, say, 4 years of college education. But the gist of it is he suggests that the point of an ever smarter society was to popularize the intellectual. And he suggests it was harder to foresee the intellectualization of the popular. So in that sense, really, what he's suggesting, excuse me, good morning, Brad. I'll say hello properly a wee second just as I finish this. What he's suggesting is that at the current investiture of critics, etc., and fans in the Dune movie is an attempt to intellectualize something that's popular culture. So the suggestion is that Dune is pop culture and not intellectual at all, and that the film is an attempt to intellectualize the book. I think that's the gist of it. So that was kind of why I had thought it would make an interesting topic for discussion, and I kind of wanted to see what you guys thought. But I'll catch up a wee thing. But there's Brad saying hello, Brad. How's it going? I'm wondering, have you seen the film yet? But probably not. You're waiting for your IMAX experience, but hopefully not too long now. So that was just really the gist of it, I suppose. And I'm wondering, I've actually started to have a think about this, and I'm starting to consider the Dune movie. And tonight, just prior to coming online here, I had we picked up a couple of DVDs in the supermarket, oddly enough, because my wife was fancying watching Venom and we didn't have it. But we got in the wee bargain bin the Dune TV series, the digitally remastered. And so my wife hasn't had a particularly didn't really like the film at all. We were watching. She's watched the introduction to the David Lynch film, and she's watched the introduction to this. And I suppose that the idea came to me that in terms of the new Dune movie, Denis Villeneuve's Dune movie, and in terms of how it treats its audience at an intellectual level, um, I've started to consider it. Is this a really dumbed down version of Dune for a modern audience? Um, and in saying that, it's based on having a look at the other two versions on the screen. And I don't know what you guys think, but I'll tell you this much: the David Lynch version is, regardless of what the critics at the time thought, and this constant discussion of his film being rubbish and being a failure, I think it's nonsense. I think it's a great film. I think people didn't get it at all when it came out. But the TV series, in terms of how it presents information, how it maintains the intellectual content of Dune, and how both of those versions of Dune have preserved that as well as the environmental message. I was just been thinking that in terms of what we're having removed from Denis Villeneuve's version of Dune, and that it's this again, as he says, a visual experience. I think starting to think that the new film has really been dumbed down a lot, and I'm starting to think about what's we've discussed. I suppose that's what maybe the 12 certificate or PG-13 in some countries, but I was also just sort of thinking about, I suppose, in terms of what's considered unpalatable by a modern audience, and do we need to be treated with kid gloves in that regard? So I don't know what you guys think. Well, in terms of reading the article, Brad says Middlebrow sounds like a wig. In terms of reading the article, Brad, as far as I'm concerned, I thought it was an attempt at rhetoric in a rather poor fashion, because it's an opinion piece for the Financial Times USA. And I would argue that they wouldn't really employ too many middlebrow people, if you see what I mean. But it's well, if you see what I mean, it's there's something that would bug me about it, because I did my PhD on this 10 years ago, or started it in 2006, and I finished it in 2010. So it's 10, 11 years. And to suggest again, this is part of what I like to think is, there's a certain snobbery around science fiction, and Frank Herbert indeed used to describe it as a literature that's viewed in the gutter. Um, and it's this kind of, oh, you shouldn't. I think what I got the gist of is that the person's misread um, the situation, and an attempt to intellectualize something as popular. And I had to wonder, was Dune that popular? And I never thought it was. I thought it was considered pretty highbrow and an intellectual work amongst science fiction. Um, and just in regards to having watched, just I think about the first 20, 30 minutes of the TV series there today, looking at how water's treated, how information is given to the viewer, how Paul's visions of the future, the mentats, all of it's there, even the population of Arrakis. And this is within the first, I don't know, first half hour of the show. Um, hmm. Brad says no movie as yet. Alas, Brad, I don't know. Your patience is admirable, sir, I have to say. But I don't know. So I suppose the point of what do you think? Do you, particularly of the book or maybe the film, but would you consider Dune a piece of pop culture, or would it does it have a bit more gravitas than that? I think, because I've always thought that it did. So I'd love to know what you think. Do you, and just because it's something's a science fiction book, something is popular, doesn't mean it can't be intellectual or smart, I think, you know. So I genuinely, and based on that article, got the sense that the way that the person was writing that, and it is an opinion piece, but the way that that person was writing it was that Danny Villeneuve's film is an attempt to smarten up Dune for the public. If you see what I mean, rather than, and that made me think, but I'm starting to look at it as being dumbed down for the public. You know, and the way we talk about exposition or storytelling or narrative techniques, oh, that you couldn't handle this, you can't take this, you shouldn't go. No, we can't have the Baron being that or the other. etc., etc. And I'm starting to look at it as possibly the most sanitized version of Dune that we've seen so far. Um, Joseph saying, as of the '84 film, I definitely put it in the realm of pop culture. Yeah, it gets referenced by newer media inputs, keeping it alive. I think it's a very good film, and I think it's simply unfairly treated. I think it's a fine movie of its times, and I think it's got a lot of thought put into it. Um, Absolutely, pop culture today. I suppose the question is where I was going with it is Dune the novel pop culture? Um, Interestingly, I suppose it's often one of the things that the Herbert, I suppose, Foundation is it that likes to push that Dune's the greatest science fiction book of all time. I think my edition. This is the copy that I have that I haven't written all. It's the only one I haven't written all over that survives, but this is the one that I bought. Um, as you can see, it's the greatest science fiction novel of all time, and it's a rather nice. It's just it doesn't cost much. 16.99 at the time, and it has all the John Schooner color plates, if you see what I mean. So it's a very nice copy of the book. Um, and I was wondering, just I suppose, is that pop culture? Um, and marketed as the greatest book of all time. Also, and I think this is something that Brian Herbert likes to push. That's the biggest selling. Some people do push that. I'm not sure if it's him per se, but we're often treated that Dune is the biggest selling science fiction story of all time. It's not. It's not even close. Excuse me, and it never has been. And you may get the likes of a global film push, maybe helping the sales of that book. But hmm, how well did it sell before the '84 film? Yeah, see, I mean, kind of an underground book. I always thought part of the it's sold perennially or annually. I suppose some books do that. Um, I think we had. Let me see. Amazon something list of best selling books, and has a list like that. For example, we've got books with more than 100 million copies. The Hobbit there, first published in 1937, has 140.6 million sales approximately. Really interesting to see the Little Prince there with 100 million sales. What a great story. Um, the Dream of the Red Chamber. But if we go in, if we think what's the first science fiction book that we hit on the list, uh, hmm, and it's interesting how these things change over time. Let me see, and I would argue it's probably 1984. England, goodness gracious! Watership Down, Charlotte's Web. Where are we? 1984 at 30 million sales. I can't see a science fiction book prior to that. And I think Dune, let me see, it's probably on here. Let's have a wee quick look for you folks, and then let's see where Dune is. Yeah, Dune coming in at 20 million sales, according to the Wikipedia page. And that's from being published in 1965. Let me just think, Frank Herbert, archive from the original, retrieved from Macmillan on Dune. So that's going back a few years. I think that's maybe going back about 10 years. And it's one of those ones, I suppose, where people would kind of go, not 1984, that's not science fiction, which of course it is. So it's sold pretty well, don't get me wrong, but it's not like up massively up there. And you'll probably, I would say, globally get a large shift in the book sales for Dune coming up. But that it's quite interesting. But you see, one of the things that I considered whenever I did my PhD on it was that Dune was different, and I wanted to do something on that, something that was considered proper literature, obviously, and that had been overlooked and had real teeth to it. As I suppose something to really get your teeth into. A lot of topics that you could look at in PhD. There's just not enough really. With Dune, there's far too much. But the level of, I would say, what's the word I'm looking for? The level of complexity within Dune, the cultural references, the style of the writing. I'd argue it's a high piece of literature. It's a good piece of literature, and if it's, I wouldn't necessarily say it's always been popular. So it was this sort of juxtaposition of intellectualization and pop culture. And I genuinely had a little think about it. And I don't know what you guys think as Dune fans. And I know, Brad, you're not maybe in the position to check out the new movie, but just yet. But in terms of, I'm really am starting to look at this new film as dumbed down, really dumbed down by Hollywood. And as much as it's brilliantly beautiful and this visual and oral, gem to behold if you see it on the right screen, I think it's seriously lacking in a lot of ways. And I'm starting to be a bit very ponderous about the term masterpiece being thrown around. I have to say. Brad says, let's have a wee look. Dune, the book, was popularised through the universities due to its environmental message, as you pointed out. As such, it shouldn't be considered consumer pulp. Can't as yet comment on the movie if drop. Yes, Brad. Dune is 20 million sales, if we remember correctly. Yeah, we just had a wee nosy about that. I think that those figures were done about 12 years ago, I think, looking at the Wikipedia reference. So I'm sure it's sold plenty of copies since then. Visually, yeah, it's beautiful. There was something, Joseph. I'll tell you. I was looking at. I was just chatting to my wife about. I think somebody posted. Was it Rally Secrets of Dune posted? Here's a picture of the desert, in Jordan, and here's what happened afterwards. And we were both agreeing that can't believe that they flew all that way just to film that, and then built a whole lot of CGI around it. It was almost like you didn't need to bother to fly to Jordan at all. You could have built a sand pit in your backyard and stuck two rocks in it. It's hard not to create a visual masterpiece with all those millions of pounds being thrown at CGI. I suppose, our computer graphics. Visualism as an adaptation of the book, it is a thing that exists. That's a very good way of putting it, Joseph. But I take it you have seen it, Joseph. What do you think? Honestly, has this been dumbed down for an audience? That's kind of what I'm. As I said, the chap with sorry, I keep calling him the chap. That's terrible. Must use the gentleman's proper name. And Janan Ganesh is the gentleman who wrote the piece for the Financial Times USA online. And it's an amusing wee piece, I suppose. But I think the suggestion is that, critics and intellects shouldn't suggest things like science fiction or intellectual, that it's just pop culture. I think it's condescending on a number of levels. I think it's condescending to pop culture, and I think it's condescending to books like Dune, and possibly the film as well. I don't know, but I think opinion pieces are often they're quite interesting in the media these days. We get a lot of opinion pieces with people throwing up sort of possible or potential qualifications, etc., not having them, and I don't know, very little factual work or actual investigative reporting in any sense of the word. An adaptation of the book is a thing that exists. Just not just the panning, the lenses, the shots, the use of color and timing. Yeah, I suppose, but I was actually thinking, Joseph, one of the things that almost parts of the film seem to be recreations of pieces of art that we'd seen. And it's, as much as we talk about Danny being a visual director, I'm not too sure that he gets the right sort of work out of his actors, etc. If you know what I mean. It's just one of those hindsight things. And as I think I'd said whenever we were chatting before about Dune, that initially when I'd seen it, couldn't really give an opinion, seen it on the small screen. But my opinion tends to evolve a wee bit. Pardon me. And part of me was thinking about how much I can come back to the David Lynch Dune and just stick it on anytime and totally enjoy it. And I got the same sense of, I've got another copy of the Dune TV series. I've watched it a few times. Popped it on today. Absolutely, yeah. I got straight into enjoying it. And I don't know that they're not. I got a wee bit of a sense that the new film's far too serious about itself, if you see what I mean. And as much as there's certain aspects of Dune, one of the things that Frank enjoyed about it was that I think he liked to describe it as that it also had, as much as it has all of these grandiose things, that there's very much a high sense of camp about it. Um, and I often think people overlook that it is meant to be a bit bizarre in that way, you know. Joseph saying, I think opinion pieces have learned to use shocking headlines to grab readers. And Brad says, I just picked up a copy of 1984 in a free book stand outside my neighbour's house less than an hour ago. Not sure if I already have it. I got The Handmaid's Tale from there earlier this week. Excellent, yeah. And Denny absolutely takes himself seriously, in my opinion, Joseph. I would say so. He looks like this is his serious face kind of thing. Yeah. 1984 is a great read if you haven't read it, Brad. It's one of those books that a lot of people say they've read and haven't. And it's a really good read. It's a very, I think it's a very depressing book in some ways. And some people would argue that as much as it's a warning, it's also a manual. But it's absolutely cracking dystopic science fiction. And yeah, I'd argue the whole, if you get through it, Brad, I'd argue, I have my own opinion about it, but I'd argue that the entire book, 1984, is itself meta. And that you should treat yourself as a citizen, and that this book is the equivalent of being handed. If you read the book, you'll see what I mean. There's a book within the book. There's Grimdark, Elven Warmaster saying, hello, Doc. Hello, Grimdark. Thanks for joining us. Good to have you join us. We're chatting away about an article that was in the Financial Times USA online. Just using it as a framework for our discussion tonight, really, but we're happy to chat about anything. But it was just about, the gist of it was that critics and fans and the new media, etc., are trying to, in regards to Denis Villeneuve's Dune, intellectualize popular culture, I believe is the way it was put, as opposed to the other way around. And I suppose my point of view was that I didn't look at Dune as a piece of pop culture, the novel, and that I did look at it as an intellectual work. And the article got me thinking that actually Denis Villeneuve's Dune has taken the intellectual and pushed it towards the pop culture, if you see what I mean. Yes, that's the one. Stop the Intellectualizing Pop Culture article. It's by Janan Ganesh. Yeah. It's. I mean, I've got it here. I actually got a copy of it. But there are some things that would make your skin crawl. I could agree. In particular, he's talking about. He describes himself as middlebrow, which I would suggest is a rhetorical technique to suggest that I'm suggesting that I'm quite smart. It's a rather Chaucerian kind of thing to do. But in the in the nature of it, he talks about people who are, in the America of the 1990, 24% of men and 18% of women had 4 years of college education. And he says the numbers are now 37, 38%. The spread of higher education, a British trend too, is an emancipating force, but no social changes without its perverse consequences. And then he says the academic Peter Turchin traces woke culture to the rage of a generation of underemployed humanities graduates, for instance. I do think it's quite funny. It is, and it's a bizarre article. The more, in fact, almost every opinion piece I read about on Dune is quite weird in some way. And it made me think, well, I was at university in the 90s, and I'm the first person in my family to be educated at university. Didn't happen prior to that. Excuse me. And I'm a classicist. That makes me a humanities graduate. And in terms of being not occupied, I've been working since I was 10. And I've been not unoccupied humanities graduate. I find it hilarious. I've been working my whole life. And when you're a humanities graduate and you can't get work, you go and retrain or reskill and get a job. If you see what I mean, it's a very bizarre way of looking at stuff. Arguably, I would have to say that if he's describing himself as middle brow, it's kind of a way of walking yourself out of a job, I would think, if you're working for the Financial Times. The Financial Times in the UK is meant to be a news institution of some worth and rigor, highbrow, I suppose, not middlebrow. So I suppose my point was, did we consider the book as pop culture, or do we consider it as a piece of literature? Which certainly that's how I look at it. And so, very much the sense of the argument was that Denis Villeneuve's film of Dune was an attempt to intellectualize the book, which is pop culture. And having read the article and thought about it and put some thought about it and how it's presented, uh, particularly probably for the rating, I would say, I would argue it's the other way around. I would argue that a large amount of the intellectual part of Dune is being gone. It's being, oh, it's too complicated for you, or you can't handle this, that kind of thing. So Grim Dogs. Oh, hang on, let me just catch up, folks. But Brad says, due to the way the series was written, the beware of charismatic leader's message can't be expressed if only the first book is made into a film. Laughing at preaching to the choir there. Grimdark is saying Dune is a warning piece, and speculative fiction explores this stuff. Well, absolutely. I remember saying, Joseph saying, I remember saying after the IMAX first viewing that Denis had turned Dune into a Bruckheimer film. Jerry Bruckheimer. I'm trying to think those be the kind of what's his last films up there? Agamemnon, isn't it? Armageddon and those kind of films, isn't that right, Joseph? I think if I'm thinking of the right director. There are a lot of bad Dune takes out there. There are. But I thought it was an attempt to sort of make a comment about different aspects of society as well. And I don't know, I always feel quite separated from these kind of generalized remarks, I have to say. But no, I genuinely having quite obviously I've got some level of fondness for Frank Herbert's Dune. I've done a PhD on it. I've invested it, and I look at it as an intellectual work. I really do. I think it is complicated as hell, and in terms of the work that I put into it, in terms of the three major themes that I look at, there were three major themes that we had to not look at as well. Oh, that reminds me, folks, I have something for you. I've been trying to chase this book that was a big influence on Frank Herbert for some time, and I just could not find the title of the book, and I have managed to get a copy. I'll just open it up here. I'm going to hopefully get my website up soon. The book was called The Sexual Cycle of Human Warfare by Norman Walter. And I believe it's published in 1950. And there we go, The Sexual Cycle of Human Warfare by Norman Walter. That's the book I've been talking to you about for quite some time over the live discussions about how the whole sort of the themes of sex and gender being tied into war and politics, and Herbert's idea of war being a kind of this sexual periodical rhythm that overtakes mankind. That was the text, but that's the book that was the source for most of his work there. So sorry about that. I've been trying to track that down for some time and get used the name. If anybody wants a copy of it, again, you can fire me an email to the station. It's a big file. It's about 96 megabytes in size. And it's a black and white book, a PDF, but I'll happily send it to anybody if you're interested. But I'm hoping to get a wee website up and running soon where I can put all of these documents, these kind of hard to get out of print things that are to do with Dune and science fiction in general. So yeah, hopefully that'll be a bit of fun soon. Excuse me. Brad says, I was at a trivia night once. One of the questions was, what book's opening line is, it was a bright cold day in April and the clocks were all striking 13. I was accused of cheating. As I had the book in my bag, I asked the guy who accused me if he thought I had the entire library of Alexander in the backpack. His accusation was dismissed by the lady running the trivia. Yeah. It's a cracker opening. There's another great, I love good openings of books. I was trying to think, there's a really good Ian Banks opening, it's something to do with his granny exploding. But yes, indeed, that's the classic opening to 1984. And I think you should read 1984 with Animal Farm. And I would argue that Animal Farm is a piece of science fiction presented as a fable. Yeah, which is very good, but the two books go hand in hand. Yeah, 1984 is a very, very clever book. Very, very clever. Years ahead of its time, I think. And yeah, George Orwell's. It's a big seller. We were talking about why it's a big seller. It's because it's taught in so many schools. You'll generally find it on quite a lot of A-level syllabuses over here. GCSE, I think, maybe once upon a time. Pardon me. But it's my original copy. I think was my brother had done it in school, and again I had his copy. But yeah, really good book. And I think I think there's actually the person who's the person who's who was my supervisor. Uh, on the end of the videos, you'll see a dedication, Professor Richard Bradford. I think I think there's a new version of 1984. It's been published, and I think it has a foreword by him, which is interesting because I didn't think he knew much about that kind of literature. When I knew him, I thought he was mainly into the Martin Kingsley Amis, who I thought was his big area of research. So there you go. I think I've actually put an image of it in one of the videos as well. But it was the book that I used to get a lot of academics would argue with me that it wasn't science fiction, and just absurd. Really, just not a lot of thought put into that. But yeah, you'll enjoy it, Brad. A cracking book, and so many good dystopias actually from that. I would argue, if you want actually the best way to kind of read them, I would argue is if you go. Let me see. We Brave New World, 1984, Clockwork Orange. That's a good little set of 4 dystopias. And We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. Brad is the kind of originator of them all, of those particular 20th century dystopias. It's worth a read. Let me just see. Mr. Zamyatin, is he about? Anthony Burgess. Of course. Actually, do you know what? Why not make it add to all of that list 1985 by Anthony Burgess, which is an interesting book, and that's a really good set of 20th century dystopian literature. There's plenty of others. Again, The Handmaid's Tale. I do like a good dystopia, I have to say. I live in one, or arguably I live in a cacotopia, which isn't really true, to be honest with you. I could argue that I live in a, let me see, a utopia with an E, but just what would be the word, I suppose? Cacoandropoi. Shit people instead of a shit country. Let me just catch up. I remember saying that, sorry guys, Dune is a warning piece. Remember saying, right, got there. What about out? Big explosion, says Joseph. Close in-fight scenes that quickly clip and short on depth. And Grimdark saying, Dune on a surface level seems simple, but much more complex and multi-layered. Read subtext. I know Frank Herbert said in an interview, Jim Jones was applicable to his works and represents the sick mentality of cult leaders. And Brad's, there we go. Jim Jones. Not too sure of that one. That name. Oh, yeah, of course. Jones. Is that who I'm thinking of? Yeah. Sorry. Just it's funny how you say the name when you get a name not quite in context. Grimdark. Of course, I know who Jim Jones is. Yeah. That would be quite interesting to read. I know Frank Heard said it. Yeah, the cult leader, the Jonestown Massacre, isn't it? Well, it's they all poisoned. They all took poison, didn't they? I remember reading about that as a young kid. Very, I used to read books on kind of natural phenomena, and for some reason I'd got a hardback book on strange phenomena and other things, and for some reason there was something about that in that book. Sort of kind of books I used to read back when I was a kid, things like Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World and stuff. But yeah, appalling example of that kind of thing. Grimdark says Jonestown cult leader who drank the Kool-Aid with his followers and over 500 died. Yeah, human beings are strange, aren't they? We our religious sort of lot over here. I think there's a lot of them are going apocalyptic at the moment, which is nothing new, to be honest. Really, I think they've always been a bit apocalyptic here, but I think just COVID and the current times have made them go a little bit that way. That's interesting. One of the things we were talking about, guys, I don't know if you know about the remember the little attack that we had on the station a while back. Quite the racist white supremacist attack that we had. which was a bit shocking and a bit shameful. And one of the things that I was also one of the topics. I wonder what you're thinking about this, by the way. Just to quickly skip on to my other topic for tonight. Tell me what you think. I've just put up a short story called Sultana's Dream by Ruqayya Sakawat Hussain, published in 1905. It wasn't the bot, Grimdark. It wasn't the bot at all. Well, basically, I've put I put this story up today or last night, kind of as a response to that. Not particularly. It was actually a story that's was on my list of things that I'd like to do for the station. But I just thought it was a good response to have a science fiction story by a Bengali feminist Muslim female writer. And I thought, what better thing than to present, I suppose. And it got me thinking that what I'd like to do. So I've only done a few short stories up there that are public domain. And it's a great way of getting science fiction out there to people, especially stuff like that actually, I don't know if you know much about Sultana's Dream, but if you have, it's a wee short story, lasts about 20 minutes or so, if you're listening to it. But it actually has had, this woman wrote this stuff and then went out into the world and made some of it happen. And that's the kind of science fiction I like. So what I've decided to do is, we've got a couple of American science fiction short stories with Philip K. Dick, and we have Ruqayya Hussain's Sultana's Dream. So what I'm hoping to do actually is I'm going to try and find one short story or public domain short story science fiction from every country in the world. We're going to try and get them up on the station, and what I'd like to do at the end, by the time we're done, roughly, I don't know, about 204 to 208 nations in the world, what I'd like to do is see if I can find a science fiction story, hopefully that's public domain, and if not, with a bit of assistance, and get them up here on the station and present a truly international set of science fiction stories that transcend everybody's bullshit, if you see what I mean. But there we go. So that was, and I hope if you have a wee chance to get to listen to it, I find it's a fascinating story. And if you learn a bit about Bokum Ruqayya, as she's known, absolutely fascinating woman. So I really enjoyed reading that wee story and putting it together. And it's just kind of inspired me to I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to try and get science fiction from all over the world. Something representative in a good way, I think. But yeah, no, just to let you know, Grimdark, not a bot, know who it is, and etc. etc. But I think that's a better response than anything else. Brad says, I've heard the good people here say that the environmental message has fallen to the background. Has the evolution exploration also? I think it's the long build in the books. It is, Brad. It's the dominant theme that lasts through all 6 books. I would argue, well, there are others that last all the way through too, but it's the major theme that does. The evolution's part of what it's to do with Paul himself, I think, and the various groups that have evolved. So everybody has evolved up to a point. And I don't know. You're getting the sense that certain topics are not palatable for the audience from Denis Villeneuve's Dune, and we can't have the Baron. I dare say we're not getting the fact that the Baron's a paedophile, but it's most likely we're not getting the fact that he's a homosexual either. So which is a part of his character, part of his villainy. The nature of Paul himself, it's Paul that we should be seeing. Paul basically, I'd argue that what happens in Dune is his apotheosis, if you know what I mean. He's becoming almost a living god. Each of the various tasks that happens to him in the book kind of are meant to cement our, how impressed we are each. And each thing that happens to him is part of his hero's journey, part of the little deaths that he experiences. So the evolutionary message is entirely tied into his character. But it's an aspect of every group. It's massive, and every group in the universe has evolved to be the way they are. I think it's it's interesting. Joseph saying that was a fun story. Thank you. You're welcome. It's a true story as well, I suppose, Joseph. It's the sad thing. Brad says if the various messages have been slimmed down to the one message in the movie, then the movie may be dumbed down, but the book was science fiction to explore ideas, which is the great thing about it. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it's a great book. That's what I mean. Consider it pop. It is a book full of ideas, and it's not ramming them down your throat. It allows you to explore them in a fun way, I suppose. Um, and I often say, I think it's really interesting because we all do like and admire Paul and Leto, and I always love poking at people and going, "But you shouldn't." Why? They're, whenever we take time to think about Dune, it really does, can mess with our heads quite a bit. It's got so much going on in it. But yeah, the warnings of the leaders, I suppose. I find it interesting if you put it into a modern day context. Who would June be warning you about? I'm sure there is some Vatican City science fiction, Brad. That's exactly my point. I would take that. Though I'd argue almost everything produced by the Vatican's fantasy. But sorry, I'm pretty sure there are. There's bound to be a Vatican City science fiction writer. As much as I joke that there is a state, was it Northrop Frye, and I think we talk about only societies that have a discussion about evolution, about how you evolve, can produce science fiction. And so I live in a society that doesn't produce science fiction because we don't have that conversation. But it is an interesting one. I wonder, is it possible, Brad? That's the thing, guys. What do you think? Is it possible to get a science fiction story from every nation on the world in public domain? Are there countries that are so oppressive that it doesn't exist? That kind of thing. It's interesting. And I think lately, particularly within Africa, I think there's a lot of new science fiction. Was Afrofuturism, I believe, is the term. I haven't read a single book of Afrofuturistic science fiction, if that is the term. And it's something that, again, because I come from a society that doesn't really produce science fiction, yet I love it, and I'm arguably an expert on it. That's what really fascinates me. I'd love to read Ghanaian science fiction, South African science fiction. We do know that there's plenty of countries that do produce it, and I suppose it's about reading outside of your comfort zone. Science fiction is dominated by the English language, I suppose, and the science fiction that I've been enjoying a lot over the most recent years. I've been actively seeking out further authors from further afield, and I'd had a really happy wee patch actually with whenever I sort of investigated some Soviet science fiction writers and then hit the Strugatsky brothers and went, whoa, got lots. Oh, thank goodness! Here's a whole chunk of stuff to read that's just going to be brilliant. And Poland's Stanisław Lem. I have a bunch of books at the minute that I'm looking forward to get reading, and they're from all around the world. Excuse me. I think I've got a German science fiction writer. Someone from Brazil, I think, all sorts. And I do think it is, as you say, it sounds like a fun challenge, Joseph, but it doesn't take long to produce a wee audiobook, put it that way. And if I don't know how many countries there are in the world, is it 204, 208 or something like that? If I actually had the texts and went, right, there's my representations of these countries, then I could probably have them done in a year, I think. It would be fun. And I'll tell you what, I'll maybe start doing a wee poll or something on the station to see what we can get for suggestions to represent each country. But you'll have to forgive me. I've gone ahead and picked Philip K. Dick for the United States of America. Who better to represent science fiction from the USA, I think. There are actually a couple of Northern Irish science fiction writers, but prior to they're better known in America. There would be Bob Shaw and James White. And they did write a bit of science fiction up until basically when we lost our civil rights movement that collapsed here. Basically, and from then on, Northern Ireland has not produced science fiction writers. Keith, could not Herbert or Asimov or Heinlein? I don't know. Asimov's born in Russia, isn't he? I don't know. I just think when I think of, do you know something, Keith? It's how you doing, Keith? By the way, good to see you. It's America that when I read Philip K. Dick books, I see an America in it that kind of, I don't know, and it's not a far futuristic. It's kind of the America that I kind of grew up seeing on TV, if you see what I mean. So and a bit like the way Ray Bradbury is really that kind of, has that kind of all, again, we don't think too much of Ray Bradbury's science fiction, more tend to think of him as kind of American Gothic maybe, or something, which I'd argue he is, but I don't know, it's just I had to pick I've already done one basically, I suppose, and it happened to be Philip K. Dick. I think a lot of Herbert stuff is, you've not much chance of catching it in the public domain, or Asimov or Heinlein. Herbert's works, controlled by the Brian Herbert and the Herbert Foundation, isn't it? I believe. Asimov stuff, I think a couple of the things have hit public domain, but I'm not too sure. And again, I think probably Heinlein stuff is, controlled by an estate. It's a question of whether you can get access to these things in public domain, I suppose, because as much as when we publish audio books and stuff like these, we've done Beyond Lies the Wub and Second Variety, which are absolutely crackers. And those two stories, along with Rug, were my introduction to Philip K. Dick. Literally those stories. So it was a kind of a wee. I'm so happy to have done these. It was like a wee childhood dream, because I always liked radio and that kind of thing. So, and I've got quite a long list of science fiction. I could probably populate half the world with good science fiction books. It would be hard with some small Pacific islands with populations in their hundreds. It would indeed. But yeah, I don't know. It's a modern world, and I'm sure there's something, and it doesn't have to be necessary. Maybe if I can get a modern writer, or someone who just, put it this way, if we can get a small island that they haven't written science fiction, maybe we can encourage somebody to write one. Keith saying, good to see you too. The legality is the bane of the creative since the beginning of lawyers. Well, the way I look at it is that the work is not mine. It is public domain, and that's why I produce it. But it's for me, the science fiction station is all about trying to kind of promote science fiction as a body of literature and a body of ideas, and, well, I suppose not just literature anymore, films and radio, all sorts, But I genuinely think science fiction, because of its thoughtfulness, I suppose, because it requires a bit of thought, a bit of intellect, I think it's a very good body of literature, and I think it particularly it teaches you to transcend all sorts of barriers. So I'd like to see a lot more of it in education, to be honest with you, and in pop culture as well. But yeah, it is interesting. I was watching young Quinn doing. He watched the Dune, the film that's been released. What was it called? Is it Planet Dune or something? The other day, and he's watching it while listening to it while people talk, and I think he's got another content, a copyright claim from the company. And I don't think he gets the fact that it's a new product. People have worked on it. It doesn't really belong to him, But Australian author Brad says John Birmingham wrote an interesting story called Weapons of Choice, World War 2.1. The story is interesting, but Birmingham is an article writer mostly, so lacks some polish in my opinion. Haven't read that one. Planet Doom, was that Asylum film? Yeah, that's the one. Dear, oh dear. I don't know. Probably, possibly. I like a good bad film, to be honest. John Birmingham. No, I don't know that one. Weapons of Choice. You reckon? I scribble that one down. Let me find my pad. Always on the search for. Goodness, I've tidied up one a little bit in here. Where are all my pens and stuff? Oh, I'll tell you what. I'll get it from the chat playback later. But it's interesting. Funny enough, I was just talking about what was it? Just noticing the other day, we're having a wee chat about us submarine science fiction. Neville shoots on the beach, and oh, is it the cars that ate Paris? Was that it? Just talking about we hadn't actually managed to see that. I think I managed to get a copy the other day. Sorry, I'm rambling a bit there, Brad, but just you were don't know where my head was going, but I was trying to think of some Australian science fiction. But yeah, it would be interesting. Obviously, I think we'll go with Ian Banks for Scotland, and I don't know, or go with Orwell probably for England. And Alistair Reynolds is Welsh, isn't he? So there's Ireland's the problem there. Who can we find for Irish science fiction? Oh, I suppose we would have to go with see if we could get some. Yeah, as I was saying, there's Bob Shaw and James White. If they're genuinely quite well regarded. But sort of once the 70s hit and the Troubles hit Northern Ireland, we don't produce science fiction writers. We produce horror writers and we produce crime writers. But our fiction reflects our society, I suppose. It's an interesting thing. So there we go. I don't know. Well, I'll put it this way, guys. If you were to pick, well, that's the big four. We've got Herbert, Heinlein, Clarke, and Asimov, I suppose. Well, the reason why Philip K. Dick's not in there is that they're called the Big Four, the Super League of Science Fiction. It was based on their book sales. But I wonder, well, if you had to pick a science fiction author, one author, to represent the United States of America, who would you pick? Be interesting. And if you can just have one, yeah. I suppose, and folks, if anybody else is from, I don't know where you're all from in the world, but if you've got a national science fiction gem, pipe in and let us know who it is. But I don't know. I find you'll find elements, stuff like science fiction and all sorts of ancient cultures around the world. And I'm a person that's not dismissive of a certain type of literature because it might not appear to be science fiction, but often I'd argue that they are. It just depends on what you think of science at the time. Mark Twain, for sure, with American writers. Very good choice. He's one of those writers who's become a character in science fiction, hasn't he? I'm very fond of Mark Twain. I haven't read a lot, but read a good bit of Mark Twain when I was quite young. And the Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, and what do you call it? Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. That was, but the £1 Million Note, is it? And I love that, by the way. I think that's great. What's the other one? Mark. Oh, goodness gracious! I was actually looking at a Mark Twain science fiction story just the other day, and I must. Oh, here we go. Let me tell you what it is. I haven't read it, and I'm about to. Mark Twain. Where? London Times, 1904. One of those. So yeah, Mark Twain's excellent. And I suppose what we were talking, who did I pick? Well, no, probably H.G. Wells for England, wouldn't it be? I suppose, but I suppose it's just about getting trying to find a flavour, and that is indicative of social change. Maybe that science fiction in that way. Mark Twain would certainly be a very good one. The Prince and the Pauper. That's what I'm thinking on Grimdark. That's Mark Twain, isn't it? My wife quite likes Charles Dickens, and I'm not a Dickens fan. I only like one Charles Dickens book, which is A Christmas Carol. Otherwise, I don't really like Charles Dickens at all. I have to say, though, I've performed on the same stage as Charles Dickens, though not at the same time, obviously. There you go. Yeah, it's interesting. And then we get to our, we start thinking about going around the world. John Birmingham wrote, he died with a falafel in his hand. Famous book here, collected stories about shared accommodation when one is university age, and that's a good read. It was made into a movie. So I think it sounds like a good title. For American flavour, Twain or Bradbury? Yeah, flavour. I suppose. Well, it's about. If you had to pick, it's kind of like one of those things. If you had to pick a foodstuff out, what would you pick to represent your country? America, probably good old American cherry pie, that kind of thing. Here would be a bowl of Irish stew, that kind of thing. But I do think it's interesting. If you look at terms of national authors and stuff, the one author that we have that we had in Northern Ireland, sorry, of any real quality. We have a few good writers, but Seamus Heaney, who's a Nobel prize winner, but unfortunately, be the hamburgers, says Keith. Unfortunately for us, I suppose, with a bit of bother with British publishing, that they published some of his poems in a book of British poetry. He took a bit of umbrage to it, and he ended up ceasing to be British or Northern Irish and gave up his citizenship and became Irish, which is a really sad thing from my point of view. I'm sure it made him very happy, but he was the poet of Northern Ireland, and his poems about the North were very much non-sectarian. I thought, yeah, there's a constant whittling away of anything to do with Northern Irish identity that's separate and of itself. That's really sad. But you be the hamburgers, Keith. I love the twin story, The Man Who Corrupted Hadleyburg. I haven't read that one. It's one of those, actually. Funny enough, you guys saying it. You get these kind of really good compendiums of complete stories by the likes of Lovecraft and Poe, Oscar Wilde, and these kind of things. And a complete works of Mark Twain is something that I would very much like to have. Grimdark says Heaney was such a gentle soul who advocated for peace between Northern and Southern Ireland in his poetry. He did. There's a lot more to him than that, and I've actually met him once a long time ago. His Beowulf translation is pretty good. I quite like it. I read Beowulf pretty much every year. I think, as I've said to you, I've got a few different translations. One of the last things he was doing was, which is part of the Northern Ireland English Lit syllabus, is the what's called what does he call it? The Burial at Thebes, I think, which is his translation of Sophocles' Antigone. So you can see why I would like him. A lot to do with the North, and particularly his poetry, the Viking stuff. Where I'm brought up, part of where I was brought up, Larne, for example, is a Viking town. Dublin's a Viking city. And so a lot to do with the particular nature of the north of Ireland, the relationship between the different invaders, the Vikings, and so on. A lot to do with the bog bodies of Ireland, which is really interesting and fascinating. But he in particular, I think, Grimdark, if you want to know his flavour on Northern Ireland, he's a poem called Hercules and Antaeus. And that's it's about keeping your people in the dirt, really. It's an interesting poem. You'd need to know a wee bit about who Heracles is and who Antaeus is. It's interesting. There's a kind of another parallel myth with that, with Theseus and a chap who's, what's his name? Is it Cynics? He's on the cover of my book, actually. There you go. That's Theseus and Sinus, yeah. So the poem that we were talking about, Hercules and Antaeus, this is a kind of retelling of the same story, but with Theseus. And so they're about highway robbers who are chthonic deities, the children of the earth. Sorry, I'm rambling away, folks. There you go. But yeah, Mark Twain. Has anybody? There's an old. Is it a Disney film? I don't know. A Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, isn't it? An American Yankee in King Arthur's Court. I remember seeing it years ago, and I thought it was really quite good. Keith, if you haven't read anything by Twain, give him a shot. He's really good. I haven't read. I would have read the Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn stories when I was at school, and I read them in primary school and when I started secondary school. But yeah, it's particularly it's the science fiction part of them that interests me. But I'm sure, oh goodness, I'm trying to remember the other Mark Twain stuff that I've read, but nothing's springing into my brain. But he's certainly an interesting character. Let me just see. Didn't he have Tom Sawyer become a spy or something? I think later on in life, I don't know. Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Prince and the Pauper. Yeah, that's the one that I think is. I really like that. Um, it's a really good story. Uh, and as I said, there's something. Yeah, a Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. That's the ones I think. I don't think there's anything. I can see that else that I would have to be. I don't know. I have to really shake my old memory, but I don't think I've read too much else. I might have read the odd short story, but I'm not getting a particularly good example of his a bibliography. There we go. Prince and the Pauper, Pudd'nhead Wilson, A Horse's Tale, Mysterious Stranger. Well, the Prince and the Paupers, the Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, I'd really recommend them. Yeah, there's a whole pile of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. That's the two books I read at school. And there's Tom Sawyer Abroad and Tom Sawyer Detective there. And then the short stories. Yeah. Like the £1 Million Banknote that's the other one that I've read. There's probably there's loads there, guys. But certainly in terms of science fiction, he's an interesting character, and definitely in terms of American literary history, I think he's certainly up there. He's very interesting, Mark Twain. Samuel Longhorn Clemens. I'm just going to catch up with your comments here for a wee bit. But we were talking just about science fiction around the world. What I suppose what if there are any particular stories or authors that would represent your country. I would. By the way, Grimdark, he was a gentle soul. I'd one of put it this way. I was teaching some of Seamus Heaney's poetry to a student from Balachi, which is where Seamus Heaney's from. And they were the joke was, I don't know if you know this, but the joke was and there's a Seamus Heaney Centre there now, if you apparently. The joke was if you know the poem Digging, and he says, "Is it my father dug more peat than any man in Toner's bog?" And I was told that the joke is that Seamus Heaney's grandfather never dug any peat in Toner's bog at all. And it was that kind of. I'm sure he did. It might have been his father's grandfather. I can't remember. It was a bit of an in joke with the locals. But I think Digging's a very funny poem. Don't really have the time for reading as I would like. You and me both, Keith. I thought Tom Sawyer became a lawyer later in life. I think he's a detective, isn't he? He's one of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, as I recall. Who's Alan Moore's? I think he's one of them. Although saying that, they're kind of a mishmash of all sorts of literary characters, aren't they? Army of Darkness, The Evil Dead Part 3 is a retelling of Connecticut Yankee from my understanding. I hadn't thought about it that way, Brad, but you could argue that it is, yes. A very perverse retelling, but yeah, I love Army of Darkness. I have to say. Both versions with two different endings. Do you understand we're going to see a sequel? Did I hear that I think, are we going to get or Evil Dead 4? Possibly. A very, very loose retake. Well, like most cinema these days, I think, That's interesting. I don't know. I've been thinking about just the Dune movie and the lack of the ecological message and the fact that how completely disappeared it seems to have been. Again, just talking about watching the TV series, all of the emphasis, the amount of discussion about water and the importance of water within the first part of the program is incredible. I miss Sam Raimi's older horror works before Spider-Man. I've seen. He kind of did. He did Darkman, didn't he? I thought was a bit. It was okay. It was something a wee bit different. I'm trying to think of what other horror films he made. Grimdark, but I'll tell you something. I used to have this as a book. They did the TV web series. We will never see an Evil Dead 4 movie. I don't know. They keep saying never, and they keep turning up. I thought the TV series was brilliant. Absolutely loved it. I really, really did. Yeah, Darkman was the Shadow knockoff he directed. Yeah, bit of a Shadow knockoff, I would have thought. Won't be in it if it's made. There's a new Bruce Campbell film coming out. I think is it Black Friday. But yeah, he's getting on a bit. But I thought, I don't know. I have to say that the TV show that was on, I think, was just amazing, and it made me think about the sort of movie, or I suppose the properties that I really enjoyed from, I suppose, the 80s and so on. But I'm thinking about things like Judge Dredd, Evil Dead. What else? The things that Mad Max as well. Certain things have been brought back in the modern era and they've been done well, and only a few of them. And that, Evil Dead, certainly. I know there was a remake. I don't think it was good, but the TV series was excellent, and I thought it was very faithful, very funny, and quite gross, and highly entertaining, which is what we could what we all needed these days. Maniac Cop. Brad says, "Aye, hey, go back. Yeah, Black Friday's the new one." The book I read by Bruce Campbell. And I don't have it. I lent it to someone, and I suppose they say you shouldn't lend books to people because you'll never get them back. But the book I read of him, by him, sorry, which I enjoyed so much, and it's a book I'd love to read again. I must get another copy. It was called "If Chins Could Kill: Confessions of a B Movie Actor." Um, and it's kind of like a biopic, as a biography, but had quite a lot of insight into making the Evil Dead films and that kind of almost student guerrilla filmmaking, and it was a really enjoyable book. And I don't really like biographies very much at all. And actually, I think he brought out a couple more, and I must get round to reading them. He's rumored to be in the next Doctor Strange movie too. Bruce Campbell. Doctor Strange. Yeah. Marvel. I'm kind of. I don't know. I certainly wouldn't rush out to see a Marvel film. At the minute these days, I think. I'm Marvel superheroed out, and you have to bear in mind I was Marvel superheroed out in the 1980s from the comics. Not that we saw too many of them over here at American Comics, but they were just massive. We always thought they were just massive clones of each other. So I got scunnered with the Marvel comics in the very probably the late 70s, early 80s. I'm very much stuck to British or European comics, which were much more. European comics were much more interesting than American comics. I have to say, and in all the wrong ways. They were very, very good. Now, How to Make Love the Bruce Campbell Way was in there, but yeah, I understand, Brad, that you brought out a few of them, and it was a wee while back actually when I was looking into. I think this is before I did my PhD, and I was thinking about making a film, and I thought it would be full of insight into how to do things on the cheap. In all the interviews, Bruce Campbell comes off as very intelligent. I'm not surprised his book was good. It was a really good book, Keith. I've read it once, and I remember reading it so well. But it was so, and the fact that it wasn't his kind of rags to riches sort of story, because it was kind of his. It's more of his rags to B movie actor. Um, and yeah, it's a really nice book. It's got a good sense of humor to it, and he seems to have had a good life and enjoyed it. Making movies the Bruce Campbell way, I suppose. But How to Make Love, yeah, How to Make Love the Bruce Campbell way. That sounds like a book for the bookcase. Because we're talking about, myself and my wife talking about the unusual books that we have, and occasionally we might actually buy a book for its daft title. She bought a book not too long back there. I think it was called "Sex in the Afterlife: A Practical Guide to Having Sex After Your Death." I must dig it out for you. But the one that I've been enjoying on my shelf lately is, of course, Bertrand Russell's Common Sense and Nuclear Warfare. Got to live your life by that. But yeah, as you say, Keith, he's very smart. I think he's very witty, and he's very good at playing that kind of. I suppose Ash is one of the ultimate anti-heroes in that he's really stupid. He's the self-absorbed, kind of self-serving, very stupid hero who just somehow does the right thing, gets through in the end, doesn't he? Bruce Campbell is proud that he is the maitre d' in the Spider-Man movie. He's the only person to defeat Spider-Man. And doesn't I think is it Sam Raimi always has the Oldsmobile, isn't it, in all of his films? I think. Interesting. Whoa, we lost some hair. Pardon me, if I had any hair still. Put it this way: 20 years ago, that no, maybe 30 years ago, that might have been a problem. Excuse me, folks. So there we are. I don't know if you've got any questions or comments about what you thought about this article, this idea tonight. It was just a sort of we try to come up with a weird idea of framing stuff. Um, I haven't finished my episode on the Pelopids because it's gotten so enormous. But that's why we stopped to do a wee bit of an audiobook this week. But hopefully, fingers crossed, and I don't like to keep saying this, but hopefully we will have it finished for you next week. This is Friday, isn't it? Friday the 12th. Yeah, so it's the 12th of the 11th, 21. So it's a palindrome day. But hopefully we'll have this episode on built for you and done for next week, and I may actually have to split it in two. It's getting a bit silly, and it's not because I wanted to make. I'm just trying to be thorough and explain the Pelopid line and the different myths that are overlaid into Dune and so on. There's something that somebody said a wee bit back there about if we only deal with Dune, we only get we don't get the warning. If you see what I mean. I think we're going way, way back. Dune's a warning piece. Yeah, Brad, it was you that said it. Due to the way the series was written, the beware of charismatic leaders message can't be expressed if only the first book is made into a film. Preaching to the choir there. It was that wee point, by the way, Brad, is that I'll always point out that there are actually clues to Paul Atreides and the dangerous hero in the first Dune book. And there's particular. I'll tell you what. I'll very very quickly read you a wee bit of something I was writing, but it's just to give you a kind of idea. Let me see. And it's to do with the bit I suppose that I'm working at. There we go. All right, so here you go. It's to do with Paul sacrificing Leto the second. And he says, "My son is dead," Paul said, and he knew as he spoke that it was all true. "My son is dead, and Ali is captive, hostage." He felt emptied, a shell without emotions. Everything he touched brought death and grief. And it was like a disease that could spread across the universe. He could feel the old man wisdom, the accumulation out of the experiences from countless possible lives. Something seemed to chuckle and rub its hands within him. And Paul thought, how little the universe knows about the nature of real cruelty. That's a good example. And then ennui is the other term that he uses. And it's the point where Paul uses that term. I think that's both of those moments in Dune should tell you enough, I think. But maybe that's just me reading too much into it. But the fact that he lets his son die in order for the war to happen, or that it prevents other possible paths. But that actual little conversation that Paul has there, and then he talks about ennui. And if you're not familiar with the term, if you, for those of you who like, let me see, Cowboy Bebop in its original form, you might be well aware of the term existential ennui. My son used to come in from get told off by his primary school teacher that because he'd said the classes were boring. So I told him to go in and tell the teacher that next time he was bored, he should say he's suffering from existential ennui. So it's that soul destroying boredom for, and it's almost that I could just do all this because I'm bored. It's and when you know everything, it's a very there's things about Paul's character that are Brad said, "Yep, the car, the Oldsmobile." Paul's father takes them all down in a power play, foreshadowing everything about what Leto the First does. I think is incredibly stupid. I'll tell you one thing that I did notice today, and I was wondering who the actress was, and I think it's Sasha Reeves. Saskia Reeves it is, and I was what I was thinking about was the chemistry on screen between Leto and Jessica, and I thought there was pretty decent chemistry between um, Leto and Jessica in the David Lynch film. I was trying to remember the actor's name. Goodness gracious, that's terrible of me. Um, but then I was actually watching the TV series again there just today, and the whole how Jessica takes over House Atreides when they arrive on Arrakis. And what I was actually really impressed by was the level of on-screen chemistry between Saskia Reeves and William Hurt, and even the family being and I just didn't see much of that on the screen at all. I thought there's very poor chemistry between the actors. Um, Paul's father takes them all down in a power play. Foreshadowing. Yeah, everything's. I suppose everything in Dune could be prevented by a marriage, couldn't it? And I wonder. We often wonder how that would have played out for the Harkonnens if Leto just decided to keep Jessica as a concubine and marry into the royal family, and one generation later his son would ascend. There's there's a marriage method. There is a marriage line to the throne um, that's kept open. But I think why not just you could have confirmed Jessica as a concubine and taken a wife, if you see what I mean. It's bizarre. But I even everything that Paul does, or Paul's father Leto does in terms of the family, moving them all there, all of the choices that he makes, and then even knowing that they may have to run, etc., etc. There's a lot of, I suppose, what you might call bad wisdom in Dune. That, for example, the first step that one takes in avoiding a trap is being aware of its existence. I'd argue that the second trap, a second thing that one does whenever one's aware of a trap is not to walk into it, and that would apply to all traps. I think it's common sense, if you see what I mean. There you go. It's interesting, but I have to say, yeah, we were talking about Bruce Campbell would make a good emperor, wouldn't he? Too old. He could make he's too old for certain things, isn't he? But Bruce Campbell would be nice to see him in something like Dune, I suppose. But there we go. Well, listen, folks. If you've got any questions, fire away, or any comments about tonight. Hopefully, as I said, next week we'll run with a wee theme, and that we should have a quite a chunky episode up for you. And I think what we'll do is we'll try and keep it for a premiere for about 10 o'clock on Friday, and then we can run the live chat afterwards. But hopefully we'll have this Pelipids episode done. So we've got about another day's worth of writing, I think. And then once we've that done, we'll get the sound recorded and then put together a whole bunch of images, hopefully, with it, and try and run it through the different aspects of the characters and the action in Dune. It's all very heavy stuff, I have to say. A wee bit unpalatable in some ways. I don't know. I think the word unpalatable, it's a word that's been on a lot of people's tongues lately. It's I don't know if you saw this story in the UK, but Terry Gilliam has been was about to do a production at the Old Vic Theatre, and this is the theatre that was employing Kevin Spacey prior to all the Kevin Spacey stuff. Well, basically, Terry Gilliam made quite a funny joke. I thought it was a funny joke, and they've all reacted quite badly and cancelled his production. But John Cleese, now of course Terry Gilliam is one of Monty Python, so John Cleese was meant to be doing a talk. I think coming up the other day at I think it's Cambridge University, and it turned out that they've started creating a blacklist of comedians. Some guy turned up and did a routine where he dressed up as Hitler and impersonated Hitler in order to make a comedic point, and they found that unacceptable and blacklisted the comedian. So John Cleese just the other day had preempted them by blacklisting himself, having pointed out that he's dressed as Hitler many times over his career in Monty Python. So it's a wee bit of a kick in the teeth to this kind of woke censorship. So the result of that is I don't think we're going to see not that the Old Vic's a great theatre really to go to. I've been to it once. I was at a premiere there once, but I don't think they're going to see the Terry Gilliam thing, and it's an attempt to sort of hammer Terry Gilliam with a total lack of sense of humor. But very interestingly enough, John Cleese has therefore got this because he blacklisted himself and he was meant to speak there. Um, he's had this black. They've decided to get rid of this blacklist at Cambridge University. But it's all about dodging, I think, these days. There you go. I thought it was quite funny, but it's this. There's a yeah. I don't know. It's a very funny situation, but the whole idea that not palatable, something that you can't swallow. I think it's bizarre. I think Dune has suffered a lot for that. I think. Jessica should be madly in love with Leto, destroying thousands of years of planning out of love. Absolutely. Yeah, it is all out of love, isn't it? It's that kind of thing. Um, and I also thought the whole kind of the plot where how it worries about Jessica and the fact that we get to see that level of trust that she has within the household. I think it's a real shame, and I actually thought the way people talk about the TV series, I think it's excellent. It really is good. It suffers on a budgetary level, it's costumes and things, but not always. And the start of it's fantastic, I thought, and slightly different than the book, but works hard to help its audience understand what's going on. You see what I mean? But yes, indeed, Jessica should be madly in love with Leto. I agree. Jessica's I think a much more interesting character in the book, and in all versions. I think the most recent form of Jessica has been the most diluted, um, the least lethal, and I don't know, the least sure of herself. I think it's really made. I suppose I don't know if it's an attempt to make the character vulnerable or more feminine, but did not need any of those things at all. Interesting. Well, listen, folks. I'm just going to say we'll call it a night for tonight. Anyway, but thank you very much for joining us. And as I said, if you haven't checked out, if you like your audiobooks, have a wee listen to Sultana's Dream. Um, it's a good wee one. It has flying cars and sun power and all sorts of stuff. But it was a very progressive thing for when it was written in 1905. And hopefully we'll see you all next week as usual. If anybody's got any wee questions or topics that you'd like me to look at as we set up for next week, you can fire me a wee email at sciencefictionstation@gmail.com. Hi, Christopher. Have a good night yourself, sir. And otherwise, hopefully we'll see you next week, folks. Definitely with an episode on something to do with June, and then hopefully we'll do our live chat afterwards. So in the meantime, wherever you are around the world, look after yourselves. Take care. Thanks very much for joining me, and we'll see you all next week at the same time. Thanks now, and good night. Good night, guys. All the best.